Hey guys! After making my top 13 Horror Nights Mazes video, I decided to make a tier list ranking video of every Horror Nights maze I've been through in the last decade. Starting off at the bottom in the F tier is nothing. Good and bad, I've loved every maze at Horror Nights, and over the last few years of working the event, I understand how much hard work is put into making these mazes. I just didn't have it in my heart to put anything at the very bottom. Next up on the E tier is This Is the End, Stranger Things 2 from 2019, The Exorcist from both years, The House of Horrors Vampire and Wolfman Overlay, Hostel, The First Purge, The Blumhouse Maze with Unfriended and Truth or Dare, Saw Game Over, The Last Insidious Maze, and Walking Dead Wolves Not Far. For mazes like The Exorcist or Alien vs. Predator that returned multiple years, I decided to just count them once, so this is the only time you'll see Exorcist on the list. This Is the End wasn't a great movie, and it was odd seeing it at Horror Nights. It had some fun moments and cool colors, but it wasn't very memorable. The first year we had Stranger Things at Horror Nights was fantastic, one of my favorites. But sadly, the second year did not live up to expectations. It still had some cool moments in it, but overall some of the effects and scares were lackluster. The maze was almost entirely Demodog puppet scares. It was also constantly busy, and the maze was constantly backed up with guests all the time. I went through the Exorcist maze both years, and neither of those years blew me away. I've always respected the film, but it's never been one of my favorites, and it's hard to do a maze based on that film. It's just a constant loop of black walls and the same bedroom over and over. All of the House of Horror overlays were always fun, but it was low effort compared to some of the other mazes. I love the Wolfman and Vampire, so I'm always happy to see them too, but these mazes just weren't very unique. Hostel's another film I'm not a huge fan of. Facade was really cool, and there were cool moments, but going through the maze just felt like another Saw maze, which is why Saw is also at the bottom of my list. The First Purge wasn't my favorite film, and when they announced it as a maze, I wasn't too enthusiastic, especially after several years of The Purge taking over the Terror Tram and different mazes. Once again, another maze with some cool moments, but overall forgettable. The Insidious mazes before this one were much better. For one, this maze focused on the latest movie in the franchise, which was by far the worst. It had cool moments, it brought back ghosts and demons from the past films, but at this point it was getting kind of tired. Like The Purge and Insidious, Walking Dead was back again, and it was starting to get old. I love The Walking Dead, I've been watching the show since day one, and I was excited when we got the year-round attraction, but you can only do Walking Dead mazes for so many years. Lastly, in the E column, is the Blumhouse maze with Truth or Dare and Unfriended. Truth or Dare was not a great film, and what's funny is the maze was actually better than the film. Unfriended was a fine movie, but it was very difficult to make it work as a maze, and they did the best they could. But overall, this was just a very forgettable maze. I also wanted to say that this video will only include mazes. It won't include year-round haunts like the Walking Dead attraction or the House of Horror. I'm also excluding the Terror Tram from this video. There were enough mazes as it was, and I was running out of room on this chart. Maybe next time I'll do a Terror Tram ranking video too. Next in the D tier is the Face Off and Universal Monsters remix overlays at the House of Horrors maze. Both of the Alice Cooper mazes, Black Sabbath, Dracula Untold, El Cucuy, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake from 2010, Insidious, and Walking Dead again. I've never been a huge fan of the music-themed mazes like Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper. They always have cool visuals and character designs, but they just aren't as impactful or scary to me, which is why they're lower on my list. Face Off and the Universal Monsters remix, much like the Wolfman and Vampires, is just a simple overlay of the House of Horrors attraction. But at least these two mazes had more unique characters, lighting, music, and effects, which put them one level up. Dracula Untold had some cool scenes, and is another maze that I thought was better than the actual film. The Elm Street remake maze was a fun one, but not the best slasher maze we've had. El Cucuy was a cool original maze with some gruesome scenes and a creepy creature, but it still only makes it to the D tier. And lastly was the first year we got an Insidious maze. At this point, the first two films had come out, and the Insidious franchise was super popular. The music was creepy, the ghosts looked great, and the maze was overall a good one. Next up on the C tier is Crimson Peak, American Horror Story Roanoke, the second Insidious maze, La Llorona, Holidays in Hell, Ghostbusters, House of a Thousand Corpses, Halloween 4, Blumhouse with Sinister, Happy Death Day, and The Purge, the first Walking Dead maze, and 2 of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre mazes. I'm a huge fan of Mike Flanagan and was super excited to see The Haunting of Hill House as a maze. It's one of my all-time favorite shows, and there were a lot of creepy moments from it to pull from. It was great seeing several ghosts and scenes from the film. I love the part at the end when we finally go through the red room and the walls fade away to reveal all the ghosts around us. I also love seeing the tall man on the stilts, but overall I feel like the maze was lacking something and could have been better. La Llorona was a great original maze like El Cucuy, but I thought this one was a little creepier, especially with the giant La Llorona figures that were eating children in their beds. American Horror Story Roanoke was a fun one. I love seeing the creepy pilgrims and the pigmen. Halloween 4 was fun. I think it was better in 2018 than in 2021, but I'm pairing them together, so that's why it's in the C list. It was definitely the weakest of the Michael Myers mazes so far, but I still had a good time. Crimson Peak was yet again another maze that was better than the film. It took all the great visuals and sets from the film, the creepy red ghost lady, and the scenes with the bathtub and the basement. It was a fun maze with a very eerie atmosphere. The second Insidious maze, based on the first 3 films, was the best of their mazes. I'm in the minority because the third film is my favorite in the series, so I was happy to see the apartment building and the gas mask ghost. Ghostbusters was a lot of fun. It was so cool seeing a giant Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, Slimer, and all the other iconic figures from the films. I loved the sound effects of the proton packs and getting to see the lasers fly across the wall. I love the blacklight effects and the glowing Slimer in the dark rooms, and the giant terror dogs that would pounce right in your face. Holidays in Hell was another fun original maze. I love going through all the different holidays and seeing all the cool postcard art. Some of my favorites were Thanksgiving with Turkey Lurkey and the Christmas Scare Zone at the end. This was the first year we ever got The Walking Dead, and it was at its peak. We got great moments from the first 2 films, a lot of which was then carried over and put into the year-round attraction. House of a Thousand Corpses, both the first year I went back in 2010 and in 2019, were a lot of fun. I do wish they brought the 3D glasses and effects back for 2019, but it was still a lot of fun. This Blumhouse maze was much better. We got 3 great movies, Happy Death Day, The Purge, and of course Sinister. Hopefully they give Sinister its own maze one day. Both of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre mazes were a lot of fun, minus the smells. It was cool to see Chop Top in the maze and some other references to some of the other films besides the original. Next up is B tier. This includes Pandora's Box, the first Halloween maze, Clowns 3D, From Dusk Till Dawn, Poltergeist, the first Stranger Things maze, Us, the second Walking Dead maze, Ash vs. Evil Dead, the Evil Dead remake, Frankenstein vs. the Wolfman, and the Friday the 13th remake from 2010. Both years of Pandora's Box were great. I love seeing all the skeletons, the bright neon colors, the spider room, the crows, and the giant Medusa head. It was great to see it back in 2021, but hopefully we get a break from it and do something new. The original Halloween maze was one of my favorites of all the slashers. I'm a huge Michael Myers fan, and it was great after all these years to finally see him at Horror Nights. Clowns 3D was really cool. As you can tell, I love all the bright, colorful mazes, especially when they're super scary, and this maze had a lot of great freaky clowns in it. From Dusk Till Dawn was another memorable maze. I always loved the movie, but I never got to finish the show. Either way, I had a great time going through the maze. All of the vampire dancers were great, and the sets and makeup were really good. Poltergeist was another iconic maze, filled with tons of great moments from the film, including the giant skull head that would pop out of the closet, the coffins in the pool, and the freaky clown in the kids' room. The first year we got a Stranger Things maze was huge. It was really cool seeing the Demogorgon right in your face and getting to walk down Joyce's hallways with the lights. Us was a really fun maze. I loved that the facade was the Funhouse Vision Quest from the boardwalk in the film. And you get to walk through the mirror maze. The second Walking Dead maze we got focused heavily on the prison and had one of the best facades. Another franchise I'm a huge fan of is The Evil Dead, and that includes the TV series, which I was excited to see as a maze. I know some people complain that this maze had too many black walls, but I still had a fun time. I loved seeing all the different Deadites going through Ash's trailer and the house, and finally the cabin in the woods, and seeing Ash himself jumping out at you. I also love the Evil Dead remake maze. It was filled with great freaky moments from the film, like the one possessed girl cutting her mouth open, and of course the ending of the maze where you see her chainsaw the demon in half through its face. The whole room was red and blood was everywhere. It was wonderful. Next up is Frankenstein vs. the Wolfman. I love all the Universal monster mazes we've had. This one doesn't quite get to the top, partially because they didn't have enough of Slash's music. Part of what made 2018's Universal Monsters maze so great was the music, and luckily they had Slash return for Bride the next year. but I'm always happy to see Frankenstein and the Wolfman. It had great moments like when you're walking through the lab and both of them are on the gurneys around you. It was so funny seeing guests worm their way through. Some would fall to the ground and crawl between them. Lastly is the Friday the 13th remake maze. This was one of the few mazes to actually scare me in the last decade of going to Horror Nights. It was cool to see several gruesome moments from the film and some things original for the maze. I like that we got to see both Hockey Mask and Baghead Jason. It was also my first year going, and it was definitely my favorite of the year. Finally, in the A tier is Trick or Treat, The Shining, Creepshow, Krampus, Titans of Terror, Halloween 2, Silent Hill, American Horror Story, and the latest Texas Chainsaw Massacre maze from 2021. At the time, I was a huge fan of American Horror Story, and it was great to see moments from the best seasons in this maze. I love seeing Twisty and walking through the Freak Show maze, going through the hotel and seeing Mr. March, and of course the Rubber Man and the Black Dahlia in the murder house. Silent Hill was freaky. I love seeing Pyramid Head, and of course the scary nurses. I think that Halloween 2 was the best of the Michael Myers mazes so far. What really made that maze stand out to me was the ending, where you get to walk through the giant jack-o'-lantern, which was filled with the scent of pumpkins, while they played Mr. Sandman, and there were floating pumpkin heads everywhere too. Terror just barely misses out on the S tier, but it was still so much fun seeing Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface all together. Instead of being based off one film strictly, they took all the highlights from all the different films, including the giant Freddy worm. Krampus was filled with great sets and atmosphere. It was actually cold in the maze, and Krampus's roar would boom through the hallways. Creepshow was another really fun maze. We got moments from both the film and the new TV series. I love seeing the zombie dad from Father's Day, Fluffy from the crate, and of course all the roaches coming out of the old man. The latest Texas Chainsaw Massacre maze was great. I think it learned from the mazes of the past and took the best of the best for this maze. I love that we're getting more actors hanging out in front of the facade. This year we had the hitchhiker talking to guests as they would enter the maze. Trick or Treat's another one of my favorite films, and it was great to see Sam and several other characters and moments brought to life in this maze. Unfortunately, there were a few too many black walls to make it to S tier for this maze. Lastly is The Shining, which is my all-time favorite horror film. I love that we got to go through the hotel, see all the skeleton ghosts, walk through room 237, and of course the hedge maze at the end. The Jack Nicholson masks were great, the music was great, and I had a blast. But sadly, this maze also doesn't make it quite to the top. Finally, at the top of my list on the S tier is The Thing, The Bride of Frankenstein Lives, Freddy vs. Jason, Alien vs. Predator, An American Werewolf in London, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and the 2018 Universal Monsters maze. The Thing is one of my all-time favorite horror films, and the prequel's cool too. This maze gave us a cold, isolated setting to walk through, and we're surrounded by some of the best makeup and creature designs I've seen at Horror Nights. This was also another one of the few mazes to scare me as a guest at Horror Nights. The Bride of Frankenstein Lives was fantastic. Like I said before, I loved Slash's music and I was glad he returned. I like that we got a new original idea based off the original films. The design of the bride was great, it was cool to see the storybook chapters between scenes, and I love the look of the brides of Dracula that would attack us. I also like the scenes where we would walk between the battling brides, and we would see her throw a stake, and then you'd see the other actor with the stake out of her chest. Little moments like that were unique and fun to see. It was also awesome to see a Frankenstein on stilts at the end of the maze. And we also get to finish the maze walking through a scare zone filled with other female monsters. Freddy vs. Jason is another one of my all-time favorites. The film is a guilty pleasure, and it was a blast seeing these two horror icons face to face in a maze right in front of you. I'm a sucker for the versus mazes, and it's great to be right in the middle of the action where you have to walk between the two monsters. Alien vs. Predator was the same. It's so cool to walk through crazy Predator sets and see chest bursters, and to see a giant two-story alien queen at the end just made it one of the best. Of all the mazes I've been through, American Werewolf in London scared me the most. I was not expecting to see such great detailed werewolf puppets inches from my face howling. I love walking through the movie theater and the subway tunnels. Also, it began with one of my favorite facades from Horror Nights, the Slaughtered Lamb Pub. I think you all knew Killer Clowns from Outer Space was going to be in my S tier. From the facade to the clown costumes, the props, the music, the sets, Horror Nights nailed this maze. It was filled with iconic moments from the film, some funny, some scary, but always entertaining. And finally, my all-time favorite Hollywood Halloween Horror Nights maze, the 2018 Universal Monsters. Like I said before, Slash's music was fantastic, all of the monster designs were great, It was so cool going through all these different scenes, whether it was seeing Dr. Frankenstein and his monsters in the lab, the Phantom of the Opera at the organ, the Invisible Man in his laboratory going mad, and so much more. I went through this maze several times and it was always fun, and it started a new trend of Universal Monster mazes every year. I hope this doesn't stop anytime soon and we continue to get great Universal Monster mazes. So that's my tier ranking list of every Horror Nights maze from 2010 to 2021. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know.